Good afternoon. I am Professor Lawrence Bamikole. I teach philosophy at the University of the West Indies at Mona. I've been teaching philosophy for a while, about 2 decades. In Nigeria at the Department of Philosophy, first of all on Ondo State University, the University of Bachelor. It was 2010 that I finally got relocated to Jamaica, and I've been here since that time.
So what areas of philosophy do you specialize in?
Before I left Nigeria, I specialized in social and political philosophy, because that was the area in which I wrote my doctorate. But since relocating to Jamaica, I have shifted my attention a bit to Africana philosophy, and with Caribbean philosophy as one of its branches. So that is my focus of attention now. But I'm still doing social and political philosophy on the global level,
Sure.
and sometimes I can localize it, to the Caribbean context.
Yeah. If you can please talk about one of your publications and the thesis that you defend and what your arguments are.
My area of dissertation, like I said, is social and political philosophy. I wrote on political violence and democracy, the justification of democracy within a democratic setup. I started the thesis by trying to give a definition of violence, which is not limited to the physical harm that is done to people and to properties by certain people. I tried to extend the meaning of violence to a situation in which it's not only a physical harm that is done, but psychological harm, like slavery, colonialism, racism. I consider this also, as modes of violence, which some people are responding to. And when they are responding to these kinds of violence, sometimes it takes the form of physical force. And sometimes it is this reaction and the physical dimension that usually attract, people and say, oh, that people is terrorism and that kind of thing. Not actually remembering that covert violence has been done, and these people that are now called violence producers or terrorists are actually responding to an antecedent violence. And I actually looked at it within a democratic setup. And I argue that it is often believed that democracy, is an ideal kind of government in which we have a periodic election and everything is settled and everything. I said, no, that is not it. That even democracy has a history, especially as it relates to democratic states, that many democratic states are creation of violence. Colonialism, racism, oppression, exploitation, these are covert examples of violence people are actually reacting to. And then we discover that creation of states are product of this kind of covert violence. And therefore, violence cannot be waged away within a democratic setup. And then I argued by actually looking at the concept of democracy also. And I tried to suggest that democracy is not actually limited to a form of government. Democracy can be extended also to mean any form of organization that has a particular procedure and that also aims at promoting the interest of people who are the citizens of democratic state. So it is not only the periodic election that actually defines democracy. We also need to examine the outcome of this periodic election. What are the benefits, which actually accrue for citizens within a democratic state? And what actually distinguishes a democratic state from another state that is not democratic, quote unquote, which nevertheless are receiving certain benefits, from government. And then I looked at the place of violence within a democratic setup. That is, even within a democratic setup, there's a place for violence of some kind. For example, when people are embarking on protests, even though they are doing it peacefully, nevertheless, it is a form that actually violates the rights of some people. For example, the right of free movement. When people are blocking the road, you do not allow free transport, free movement. You are violating the rights of some people, and that can be a form of violence. And we also know that there are also some kinds of protests, some kinds of riots that actually make sense within a democratic setup. It does not mean it has to involve killing or shedding of blood, but as long as such actions actually violate the rights of some people within a democratic setup, so we can argue that violence actually has a place in democracy. That is one thing. Then I actually argue that even within an inner democracy, violence can actually be used to transcend democracy. Look at the view expressed by John Ross, the theory of justice. That justice is the foundation of all institutions. And if there's any institution that is unjust, we have to reform it, and if it is not reformable, it has to undergo a kind of revolution. The only problem is that some people think that every revolution will involve violence or shedding of blood. That is not right. There might be peaceful revolution which aims at actually changing the structural, form of a particular state. This is different from reforming. Reformism entails trying to change some aspects of government, like education, like economics. But when we are talking in terms of revolution, we are talking in terms of the total overhaul of the system. And when that is complete, the outcome is no longer the kind of the Asian regime. It has undergone a bit of transformation. And in the literature, this is the kind of violence that people have preached, that you can actually use that of kind to transcend democracy, maybe to a socialist state. You see, because when we say states, sometimes as a philosopher, I actually argue that there might be quote-unquote objective criteria that can be used to actually evaluate particular forms of state, such that one can argue that this kind of state is better than this kind of state. And my argument is that everything that we do within the political arena aims at some human welfare. And this welfare can take the form of physical welfare, psychological welfare, political welfare, economic welfare. Okay. If there's a form of state that can actually answer to the needs of the people in relation to this aspect of the human person, more than any state, one can say that this state is better than that without necessarily introducing a kind of ideology.
So what are some of those objective criteria that you use to evaluate different types of governments?
Yes, this is the argument that human person, who is supposed to be the focus of all political organizations, have certain needs. And these needs are extension of their nature. Physically, we have physical needs like food, shelter, housing. Psychological needs like freedom, freedom from oppression, equality, ethical behavior generally. It is part of our nature that we should, this is at the level of the art. And of course, we also have spiritual needs. Complete. These are the different aspects of a human person. And all these aspects require a kind of development. to the extent that when these developments are put together, we can actually say, yes, this person has developed maximally in relation to the aspects of his or her developmental needs. And if there's any state that can do that more than any other state, I can say that state is better than that one.
Okay.
Not maybe whether it is democracy or whatever. I am not supporting autocratic regime, no. I am not supporting military regime, no. I am just saying that maybe any form of state that takes the interests and the rights of the people into consideration and put in place policies that are able to fulfill these rights, it's a good state from my own view.
So what are two of the case studies that you used in terms of comparing countries or governments?
I actually use Nigeria as an example because I have a chapter on Nigeria political system. All the theoretical analysis that I had from violence, from democracy, from politics, I now applied them to the Nigerian political system. I looked at the history of the country. I focused attention on military because we have stories of history of military regime, and I situated my conception of violence within that paradigm. I said maybe the Nigerian state, for example, is also the product of violence of one way or the other, and certain governmental actions and inactions also actually constitute violence, which people are responding to, other via riots or protests or whatever. And then I looked at the place of the military within the political setup of Nigeria, and then I tried to examine particular military regimes and how they actually carried out coup to actually upset preceding regime and so on and so forth. I know that in Nigeria, the military has come, to constitute a great portion of Nigerian political system. And the reason is that many of even the democratic politicians now, some of them are military people. You remember that the former head of state of Nigeria, Richard Obasanjo, was a former head of state. This present president, Muhammadu Buhari, was also a very, head of state. So it appears that the military has come to stay historically in Nigeria, even though we are no longer having coup and counter-coup. Products of the system, they have come to conquer the Nigerian state as a colossus, so they are still there.
Whether the military is present in the government in terms of either directly through a coup or indirectly through someone who was in the military and then was elected, to what degree do they meet those human development goals or human development index?
Military regime is quite different from a democratic regime.
Yeah.
Military regime acts on a rigid order from above, even though they have what we call the Supreme Military Council, even from the nomenclature, Supreme Military Council, they are supreme. They do not require any kind of decision or whatever. Whatever decision they take is the supreme. So they have that organization. But when it comes to democracy, there are layers, of government, from the local government to House of Assembly to the state in terms of executive power, then House of Rep, Senate, and of course the presidency. And ideally, power flows from, ideally it has to be from bottom up. But in Nigeria's situation, it's as if from up to bottom, and that is one of the problems we have with the Nigerian democratic system. And I think this kind of democracy is also a reflection of the type of political structure that we are operating in Nigeria. It appears the system is so much thwarted to this up down kind of something rather than down, and the reason is that the structure of the country is a bit rigid. Power tends to be tends to concentrate on the center. That is, which I say, that's Abuja, which is the state capital. You can still imagine that almost every month, people still, governors have to attend a meeting in which there's a formula for sharing revenue and everything, and it is the federal government that has to do this. So the idea of devolution of power, it's still lacking within our system. So the federal, what we call the federal system, is so powerful, and that is why people continue to struggle for power in order to get, to the top, because they know that it is at the top that have influence in terms of economy, in terms of the financial system and everything. But assuming that we have a kind of loose kind of federation, this idea of struggling for power will have to be lessened. And that is one of the lessons that we continue, to actually mention within the Nigerian system. We must operate a kind of loose federation in which states, government, they are autonomous to some extent. That does not say that we cannot have just the federal system in which, we can answer to. It shouldn't be so much powerful to the extent that everything will have to depend on it, because that is why people struggle for power in order to get there. You remember that Jamaica is also a black country. You cannot recount this history of slavery and everything. And since I have been here, I have been able to look at the structure of the political system here. There's usually the language that the political system is very tribalistic, in the sense that people are divided along political lines. They usually call it garrison politics, meaning that in a particular space, there are some people that are there that are aligned to particular political party, which actually excludes another political party, such that people can identify the line that you shouldn't cross, and when you cross it, definitely there's going to be conflict and actually result in violence. Now, the Jamaican state also is a state in which there are many divisions. Some people are uptown, some people are downtown, some people are urban, some people are in rural, and these kind of things. You see, these distinctions are not ordinarily empirical distinctions. They also have economic dimension, social dimension, in relation to how does this kind of decision actually promote the interests of the populace. And that is why you can see that within the Jamaican state, some people are very rich, while some people are very poor. And then we can see, even physically, from how communities are located. From my own personal observation, I have come to see that if there's a very rich community made up of some people that can be called uptown, around there will be very poor community. And I think this poor community are also related one way or the other to the rich community, that kind of thing. So this is the kind of thing that is worth investigating. And where every modern state has its own problem, especially the problem of violence. Okay, and maybe by your stay you must have heard that the Jamaican state is a lot of violence and that kind of thing. Well, since I've been here, I have not witnessed any violence directed against my person, even though I watch on television and I hear news and that kind of thing. So maybe it depends on how you comport yourself. Most of the violence here, according to the police report, they are linked with gangs and that kind of thing. And there might be explanation in relation to the existence of gangs. Many of these gangs, they are young people who are not employed or who are not employable, because maybe they lack education, they lack that kind of characteristic that can move them to have a skill. If we have young people that are full of energy and they don't have anything to do, definitely they have to do something. And that is, to me, that might be one of the reasons why, we have this kind of violence. The suggestion is that, the government, in relation to engaging the youth, and I think the government is trying, they should engage the youth, make them, to be skillful, make them to be employable, because when you are at work and you are doing something, you won't have time to be thinking in terms of harming other people or whatever. This is the kind of thing. And then we need a kind of education that entails, civic, what we call civic education, meaning that you are responsible. Well, you are responsible to yourself. Your life should make meaning to you. If you attach meaning to your own life, there's a tendency for you to attach meaning to another person's life. And therefore, there's a tendency for you to respect your life and respect the life of others. So this idea of killing everything will not actually happen. We require this kind of education right from the kindergarten up to the highest level of education. Civic must be taught in schools. In philosophy, we have been trying to be at the forefront of saying that some philosophy must be compulsory for all students at the university level. Critical thinking, for example. Critical and ethical thinking. Because sometimes you can think critically, you might not be able to apply it in relation to human, relationship. And therefore, we have been canvassing for the making it compulsory, critical thinking and ethical thinking. And we have been trying this because we have been trying to organize different kind of outreach events that people can come and then listen to us. At the section we usually have the October 2nd is Gandhi Day, whereby we celebrate the birthday of Indira Gandhi. We know that he was an apostle of non-violence. We organize that system and people will come, we deliver addresses, and then there's also the third week of every November, UNESCO Philosophy Day. It's also a great event for our section in which we organize and we give talks, we invite people, and then we see how philosophy is applicable to society as a whole.
For sure.
Yeah.
And also kind of going on with the gang violence, just in general, like if a certain group of people feel neglected, and neglect is kind of also a form of abuse or violence. Yeah, exactly. So it's definitely important in society to be inclusive of all areas
of life.
Yeah, exactly.
The police is trying to say they want to destroy gang and everything, but you have to get to the root. What is the cause of gang violence? Why is it the case that in order for some people to have access to things that can promote their life, they have to belong to a particular group, which is an antisocial group, before they can actually exert their autonomy, before they can exert their freedom, or before they have, access, to wealth, that kind of thing. That is a fundamental question. If government does not actually fill that gap, if that gap remains, some other things can just catch upon it and then use it, to their own detrimental end.
Thank you very much.
Okay, yeah, it's a pleasure. I just want to thank you for the opportunity that you have given unto me, at least to express my view, not only within the classroom situation, because you told me that this is a good issue, and we need this kind of thing to propagate philosophy. Because philosophy is a subject, is a discipline that is not well known, given the fact that it is not taught at the primary school level, especially within the Jamaican state. Okay, so we require a kind of information. We require a kind of of this kind of event that can actually transmit what we are trying to do within the classroom and how it can actually be meaningful, in the practical sense outside of the classroom. That is one thing that we require to do as a philosopher or as students of philosophy, as people can say. And like I said, we have been trying to do this at the University of the West Indies, and it has been bearing fruits, And I think everywhere we find ourselves, you must be able to transmit the philosophical benefits of what you are trying to do. And I think people are doing it, and to the extent, sometimes it might take some time, but eventually we are going to get there.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.